Photosynthesis, we're going to continue on today, and we're going to talk about the light and the dark reaction. So our objectives today is, number one, you are going to learn the equation for photosynthesis. So you should be able to write the balanced equation for photosynthesis. Number two, you should be able to describe both the light and the dark reaction in photosynthesis. So, when we are talking about the equation that we start with, photosynthesis can be summarized by the following. Six carbon dioxides plus 6 water plus light energy yields C6H12O6, which is glucose and 6 oxygens. So I want you to look at the arrow right there on the net equation. That arrow, everything to the left of the arrow are reactants. Those are the things that are needed for photosynthesis to occur. So the reactants for photosynthesis are carbon dioxide, water, and light. The products are what are on the right of that equation. So the products for photosynthesis are glucose, C6H12O6, and oxygen. So what is needed, what is produced, is told right here with our equation. The stages of photosynthesis. Okay? The stages of photosynthesis are broken down into 2 parts, and it is dealing with the photo and the synthesis. The photo part is what we call the light reactions. The synthesis part is what we refer to as the dark reactions, or it's also known as the Calvin cycle. Okay? So, could I use interchangeably the Calvin cycle and the dark reactions? Yes, I could. Okay, yes, I could. So the 2 parts, the photo part, the light reaction, the synthesis part, the Calvin cycle. The light reactions take place in the thylakoids. What are thylakoids? Remember back from yesterday. What are thylakoids? Nobody knows what a thylakoid is? Okay. All right, Kersey, what's a thylakoid?
It's a connected sac and chloroplast.
Okay.
The chlorophyll is in the membrane.
It's a sac in the chloroplast. The chlorophyll is in the membrane. And didn't we say that they were stacked into what? What do we call their stacks? We don't call them stacks. We call them granum, or grana is the plural. Okay? So they are stacked up in granum. The chlorophyll are in their membranes, the thylakoids. So it makes sense, because isn't chlorophyll what's absorbing the light? Yeah. So doesn't it make sense that the thylakoids are involved in the light reaction? Absolutely. Now, during the light reaction, we have 2 things. two major things that are happening. The first is that we are splitting the water. We are breaking down the water. And the second is that there is a release of oxygen. A release of oxygen. The Calvin cycle. The Calvin cycle takes place in the stroma. Okay? Now, what was the stroma? Dominic? It is the liquid fluid in the inner membrane of the chloroplast. So the Calvin cycle takes place in the stroma. It forms the sugar from carbon dioxide, and it does so using ATP and NADPH. Now, we know what ATP is, don't we? We talked about it the other day, ATP. Okay. So we know what ATP is. This NADPH is something new. Okay, that's just an abbreviation for some big, long chemical. Okay, it's not important that you know what it is. Okay, it's not important that you know what NADPH is, but it's an electron carrier. The Calvin cycle begins with carbon fixation, incorporating carbon dioxide into organic molecules. So we're starting out with carbon fixation, taking the CO2 and making that into organic molecules. Now, as I'm looking here, you should have labeled on your diagram water up top here. Color that blue. The light is shining in. What are these things right here? What are these things here? The T word? I don't think you're going to get it right if you say the T word. G? I don't think you're going to get it right if you say the G word. Okay. These are thylakoids right here. A stack of thylakoids, which are grana. So this is the grana. The bunch of these are plural, the grana. Okay? Now, the light is taken in by the chlorophyll, which is in the thylakoid. All right? And we said during the light reaction that the water's taken in, and what happens to the water? What happens to the water? What happens to the water? It splits. Okay, and the product given is oxygen. So we have the release of oxygen. Now, you see that NADPH and that ATP. Those two things are needed. Okay? They're needed, so we need the ATP and the NADH to go into the dark reactions. So, you can write ATP, color that in yellow too, because that is energy. The NADPH, you can also color in yellow. But those then go into the Calvin cycle. What does the Calvin cycle start with up at the top there? It starts with carbon dioxide. Starts with carbon dioxide. Then the box in the middle should be labeled the Calvin cycle. And what is produced in the Calvin cycle? Glucose. So the end product is going to be glucose. So go ahead and get that colored, and then we'll talk about these more after you get those colored. Now what I want you to look at, folks, is I want you to look at your equation. Look at the equation on page 61. Now, what three reactants are necessary in the process of photosynthesis? What do we need? Who can tell me one thing we need? Kobe? Water. Look up here. We need water. There it is. What's another thing we need? Derek? Light. Light energy. There it is. The light energy's coming in. What else do we need? What's the final thing? Grace? Huh? Is that on the reactant side? Okay, what's the final thing? Look at your equation. Okay, we had water, we had light. What else? What else? Carbon dioxide. Okay? So right here up top here, light, water, carbon dioxide. Those are the three things that we need for photosynthesis. What is produced? Look at your equation. What's produced? Oxygen and glucose. Well, look down here at the bottom. What are we giving off? We're giving off oxygen. We're giving off glucose. All right? So now we know the particulars of it. We know that during the light reactions, water and light are taken in by the thylakoids. Okay? The water is split. The water is split, and then we get oxygen. Now look here. What is ADP? Remember when we talked about our cell phone batteries and the cycle? This is part of this. Okay? This ADP needs to be plugged in and charged, right? Well, that happens during the light reactions because we have ADP going in. What do we have coming out? ATP. Okay? That ATP then is going into the Calvin cycle because we need energy for this Calvin cycle to occur. Now, what does the Calvin cycle need to happen? It needs carbon dioxide. Remember, the first part of the Calvin cycle is we've got to fix the carbon. So carbon fixation is the first part. So there's a lengthy process that is a cycle, that's why we call it the Calvin cycle, where the carbon is fixed and we spit out glucose as one of the products of the carbon or the Calvin cycle. Okay? So, once again, if we look at this, the dark reaction is taking carbon dioxide, going through this cycle, using the ATP as energy to produce glucose. Okay? Once the ATP is used, it goes back over to the light reactions, where it gets charged back up, and the light reactions take water and light, and through that process, they make oxygen here. Now, what is this whole thing a picture of? That's your chloroplast, right? That's your chloroplast. So where does the light reaction occur? In the thylakoid. Where does the dark reaction occur? In the stroma. Okay? Light reaction in the thylakoid, dark reaction in the stroma. And remember we said that another name for a dark reaction is the Calvin cycle. Okay?